Since we're going to be photographing a martini today, it pays for you to know what a martini glass looks like. You can't very well take a high-end brand of gin for a martini and put it into a paper cup. You can't put a $300 scotch into a washed-out jelly jar and expect your viewer to look at that jelly jar and realize that this is the finest scotch in the world. It's important for you to understand it and what kind of glass you should use, but it's also important that your client knows that you know what kind of glass to use. It has to do with having an understanding of making a product look like it's important and making a product look like it's high-end and classy and has panache. There are 3 martini glasses that I'm going to show you. Here's the first one. Notice the stem, how thin it is. It's crystal. Hear that sound? That's what a crystal glass sounds like. The rim of the glass is very, very thin. It's a high-quality glass. Here's a second glass. Now this one's a little more playful, but the stem is thicker, the glass is thicker. It doesn't have that same crystal sound, but it does have a beautiful blue glass swirl in the mouth of the glass. See? Now that might be interesting for a design element in the photograph that I'm going to be doing today. Here's a glass that I picked up in Mexico, near Cabo San Lucas. Look how thick it is. This, it may be crystal, there may be high lead content in the glass to make it crystal, but it's very thick. It also has a phenomenal iridescent glow to it. All 3 of these glasses are specifically martini glasses. There are glasses that people use to drink brandy. There are glasses that people use to drink port. There are glasses that people use to drink single malt scotches so that you can appreciate the bouquet of the scotch as you're drinking it. And as I said before, even if you would be more than happy to have a glass of scotch from a $300 bottle of scotch in a jelly jar or a paper cup, people in the know, your clients, the people who are hiring you, know what kind of glass would be used for that kind of drink. And it's your job to take a whole bunch of little tiny details and use them to impress upon the viewer of your photograph that the liquor or the beverage or the beer that you're photographing is high-end, is special, has panache, is classy, and is something that can improve their life. So we've talked about glasses, and now you have a vague understanding of what a crystal glass is and what a martini glass looks like. So you've got that picture in your mind, but now let's talk about some of the more smaller accessories to your photograph, some of the smaller elements of your photograph that should be as perfect as they can possibly be. But not only do they have to be perfect, but a sense of scale is important. This jar of olives, which is in my refrigerator, are pretty good sized. They're not the emaciated ones you see at a catering hall. But before I wanted to do this shot, when I was trying to pre-visualize it in my mind, I went to a gourmet store and I found bigger olives with pimentos in them. They also had olives with garlic cloves in them, and olives with pearl onions in them, and olives with balls of blue cheese in them. All of these things are nice to know about. They're not photographic, but they're things that can make or break your shot. Now, I'm not sure if we're not going to use the smaller olive or the larger olive because it has to do with the glass that I choose to use and the scale of the olive relative to the glass. But the point of the matter is that you should know, think about things like that. You should think about what size olive do I need in that glass to get my message across. Obviously, the bigger olives are more expensive than the smaller olives. So if we're talking about just from a class point of view, the bigger olives might be the way to go. But if the glass was small, a smaller olive might actually look better in the glass. Okay, so now we've chosen a glass and we've got various olives to choose from. But usually when you make a martini, the olive is mounted on is skewered with a toothpick. Now, here are some toothpicks that you buy a box of them for like 39 cents. 39 cents for 250 toothpicks. They're all the same size, they're all exactly the same, and actually there's nothing special about them. But if our shot today is a martini glass with a beautiful filling of ice cold gin and a touch of vermouth in it, and 2 olives, toothpicks can become a major element of what we're photographing. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was in a gourmet shop in Boston. And in that gourmet shop, they actually had hand-carved toothpicks from Portugal that actually have a wedge cut into one side and a sharp point, but the body is a little thicker. They're a little more rustic and they're a little more elegant. The point of the matter is that I saw these toothpicks and I bought a box of them and I said, boy, this is something that someday I might really need. Now it's 5 or 6 years later and someday I'll get up to Boston and look for that store again because I only have about 10 of these toothpicks left. But the point of the matter is that I saw them, I recognized that I might need them, and I bought them, not knowing when I would use them. So not only do I have to recognize them and buy them, but then you have to remember where you put them. For a lot of years, I had a 3,000 square foot studio in Manhattan. Our studio floor was 100 feet long, well actually 98 feet long, by 28 feet wide. But you should know that in that studio, the back 30 feet of that studio was steel racks, and in those steel racks were props galore. I literally had dozens of different glasses in that studio. I could pull out a glass for a single malt scotch. I could pull out a glass for a martini. I could pull out a champagne flute. I could pull out a beer glass. I could pull out a glass that would look great with a Dr. Pepper in it or a Coke in it. We had a place to store flats, but the props were what was important. And over the years, if you've ever read my portrait book, I talk about having a prop closet, which is one way to start out. But over the years, I found and seen props that I knew would be helpful and were worth getting. If you're going to fight with the big guys and you want to photograph the $5,000 or $10,000 ad for a martini, well then this is one of the things that you should consider having, although it seems like totally ridiculous. Okay, I actually did a thumbnail sketch of this photograph before I was going to do it. The goal was to come in really close, to have 2 olives on a toothpick, and possibly a single olive on a second toothpick, and I would be shooting down on the glass, down on the top of the glass. The olives would be at a slight angle going out, and I wanted to have the gin coming into the glass and splashing out of the glass. That was what was in my mind's eye. What I started to think about once I did that thought was, where is the gin, where is the martini coming out of? Now, martinis are a mixed drink. They don't come out of a bottle. There's no such thing as a bottle of martinis. Martinis are a mixture of gin or vodka and vermouth and ice that's put together in a thing called a shaker. I was going to have this face, just this face of the martini shaker in my picture. So it would be this face and it would be the glass face shooting down into this angle and having two olives on a skewer and a splash of drink coming out this way, hitting the glass, going up the other side, and splashing over here. Now, this shaker is a nice shaker, and it's certainly serviceable. I've been using it for a long time because one of my friends is a martini freak, but it has a slit here in it, and that small slit is a place where you could actually add a small strainer, which I never found, or I lost over the years, so that when you poured out the drink, if there was a little chip of ice or if there was a piece of lemon peel in whatever you were shaking or a lemon pit, it would get caught in the strainer. All right. But this was supposed to be a high-end shot of a martini. It's why I sort of first leaned toward using the crystal martini glasses, which were these. So I went out for this particular photograph and I bought another martini shaker. This martini shaker is made of a heavier gauge chromed steel. They also had a bronze colored one in the store where I found it, but I decided that the chrome was better because then my only colors in the photograph would either be the blue swirl and a green olive and a red pimento. So I wouldn't have to deal with another color like the bronze color. I could limit the colors in my palette. If I used this glass, then everything would be clear or chromium or green and red for the olive, and I'd have even a smaller palette, which could make the picture have more impact. But this shaker also has grooves cut in it, and in general, it's a higher quality piece of material. Now, if we were going to do the shot that we're talking about here, you can't very well have a hand with a latex glove on it holding the martini shaker exactly where you want it. Not only that, but every time that you pour it, the second it turns over, the stuff is going to be coming out of the shaker into the glass, so you don't even have time to focus. You have enough problems worrying about photographing the splash than you should have to worry about making sure that the top of your martini shaker is in focus. So what you have to figure out a way of is to be able to, you can't just do, let's say this is a high-end photograph. You can't just do one click of it and say, oh, I have it, because nobody will be sure you have it. And you're not sure you have it. And you want to have a bunch of ways to make this picture repeatable. Obviously, you can't have the latex gloved hand holding the martini shaker. So one thing you might do is you might figure out a way to clamp this martini shaker exactly where you want it, so that you could see this and you could see this shape and you could see the olives on the skewer. But if you're going to clamp it there, how do you get liquid into the martini shaker so that it could come out? And how could you get the martini shaker, the liquid into the martini shaker without having to move it out of the set and put it back in? Because that would give you focus issues that are as hard to climb as Mount Everest. One way to do that would be to turn around and get yourself a hole saw, a metal cutting hole saw. You'd put a dimple in the bottom of the martini shaker. You would use this hole saw to drill a hole, a big this size hole, into the bottom of the shaker. Then the clamped martini shaker would always be in position, and you could use a measuring cup or a funnel and just keep pouring in more martinis into this glass, or a fresh glass or a dried glass, and just keep doing it until you got the photograph that you wanted. Let's move these to the side and take a little detour. What happens if you want to photograph a wine bottle, pouring wine into a wine glass? Now, obviously, you have the same problem that you have with the martini shaker. You want to make sure it's in focus. You want it to be open at one end, and you don't want to have to keep positioning it for every time you do a pour. At least not without you finding a model who has an absolutely beautiful hand to be in the picture. One of the ways around this is a special tool that it pays to know about. It's called the bottle cutter. It's not a lens, it's not a camera, it's not a light, but it can make your life a lot easier if you're trying to do a repeatable pour shot of wine or liquor. In practice, the bottle, this fits into the top of the bottle. There's a glass cutter here that fits against the glass, and by rotating the glass, you hear a scratching sound as the wheel on the cutter cuts all the way around the glass. Now, I've already scored this bottle all around, and the next step in the process is to bathe it in hot water for a couple of seconds, and then to plunge it into cold water. When we do that, the bottle should crack all around the score line that we just made. Let's see if it works. What we have here is a bowl, a pot of hot water, see the steam rising from it, and a bowl of ice and a little bit of water. We're going to put this in the bottle. We're putting the bottle into the boiling water. We're going to count to about 15 to 20 seconds. We're just letting it get hot. You can see that the bottle is starting to fog up. And then we're going to plunge it into the cold water. This obviously should make the bottle go absolutely crazy and have the bottom of it pop off. Here we go. I think that's about enough time. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Oh! Now what we could do is we could take some emery paper, because right now the bottom of this bottle is as sharp as a razor. But we could take some emery paper, we could sand it down a little bit, we could clamp the bottle like this over a wine glass or a scotch glass, depending on what the bottle was, and it would be there, and we could focus really carefully, and then we could just pour in scotch and let it pour out the other end. Let's instead take a piece of kitchen twine, which I got in a supermarket, and let's tie a slip knot in the twine. It's another one of those things that you should learn how to do. A slip knot is a loop that if you pull on one side of it, it gets tighter. All right? Now, I'm going to cut off the little bit of the tail of the twine over here. I'm going to ball up this piece of twine, and I'm going to put it in a small Pyrex dish into which I've squirted a big bunch of lighter fluid. And I'm just going to stir it around with this little screwdriver to make sure that all the twine gets used. I'm going to take the twine out of the lighter fluid. I'm going to put it around my bottle. I'm going to tighten it. We're getting there. And then I'm going to wrap. I'm going to wrap the twine around the bottle, and I'm going to tuck it in with my little screwdriver. Now, I'm going to dry my hands. I'm going to move away the dish. I'm going to light it, and I'm going to let it burn for a couple of 30 or 40 or 50 seconds. When I think it's really gotten a little bit of heat to it, I'm going to be rotating it around. We're hoping against hope that the fire alarms in the studio don't go off right now. But I'm going to just let it burn down all the way. And I'm going to keep rotating it so different parts of the twine get to use all of the lighter fluid in it. And then I'm going to plunge it. Once it burns out, I'm going to plunge it into cold water. And I accomplished the same thing. This is not as smooth and clean a cut as the previous bottle that I did. But in a pinch, I would accomplish the exact same purpose. I could clamp these two bottles in two places, and I could pour liquid through the bottom end of each bottle, and I could get a pour that would be repeatable again and again until I was satisfied with the photograph that I had accomplished. Now that we've taken a little detour and we've talked about how to take care of the bottom of a wine bottle, let's get back to shooting our martini. As has become standard operating procedure on these tutorials, it's now about 4 hours after we spent time showing you how to break the bottom off of wine bottles so that you could pour fluid in through the bottom and have it come out the spout in a controlled way, a controlled, repeatable way. Things got a little bit tiring, and we decided to break for dinner before we would continue with what we were going to show you today. We came back to the studio after spending some time in the diner, and at the diner I was spending some time blowing on a water glass filled with water and ice cubes, and I was watching it sparkle and splash around onto the diner table that we were sitting at, and I came up with the idea that we really didn't need the shaker to create the splash and the action that we wanted for the photograph. I decided that it was smarter to go back to the essence of what a martini is, which is a fabulous glass and a really good gin and a couple of olives or whatever you want to use for accessories to it on a nice skewer. We ended up doing a far shot of the glass where we showed the entire glass that I felt had a quiet elegance to it, and it was created by the lighting that we designed for the set. The acrylic on one side and the diffusion frame on the other. Then we started to add blue gels to some of the lights that we had placed behind the background to add a sense of coolness and crispness to the gin in the glass, because that fluid would be moving. We then turned around and decided it was time to actually pass a stream of air, just like I had blown on the glass in the diner, a stream of air over the gin so that it would froth and look alive and bubbly and exciting and something that was refreshing. We tried to use a Giotto blower. It certainly gave a strong enough blast of air, but the trouble was that we couldn't exactly place it where we wanted it and get it to be aimed as carefully as we wanted it to be aimed. So that didn't work. We then turned around and I grabbed a tube of gelatins that was laying around the studio, but it was wrapped up so tight, and I looked at the end of it and I said, wow, if I blow through this tube, I might be able to get the airstream to go exactly where I want it. The trouble with that is that the size of this tube is so big that the air coming through it came out as a gentle stream. And although it got the top of the surface of the gin in our martini glass to shimmer, it really didn't get it to froth the way I wanted it to. That was when I remembered the Bernoulli principle. Now, that's one of those things that's not a camera and not a lens and not a light, but it's the kind of thing that can really, excuse my French, save your ass on a photographic set. I went into the other room and I got 2 Dunkin' Donuts soda straws. I taped them together. And because they have a much smaller diameter than the tube I was using that was from the rolled up gels, that smaller diameter tube let this stream of air move much faster because it was moving the same volume of air through a smaller area. That intensity of the pressure that could come out of this small soda straw was enough to make the gin in the glass froth and bubble and splash out of the way and look alive. We turned around and we were satisfied with that part of the effect, but then we added a couple of pieces of blue gelatin to the side lights to make things really sort of feel cool and refreshing. We did about 10 different shots with the olives bouncing around in the glass, the gin splashing out this way and that way, but we ended up with what we thought was a really exciting shot. The idea is that we tried to talk about at this whole tutorial is that sometimes things that are outside of the realm of photography can help you come up with an exciting image. It can help you get across your message. It can help you satisfy your client's desires. I hope you had an interesting time tonight working with us, because we certainly had an interesting time doing this for you, and we look forward to seeing you again.